Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello, and welcome back to the Radical Secular. I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Christoph Defoe.
Today, we're going to discuss America's crisis of truth and democracy and how we got here. We've touched on this before in our segments on free speech and libertarianism, and also when we discussed the film The Social Dilemma. But we've reached yet another milestone in reality distortion with Trump's post-election autocoup attempt and the full complicity of the Republican Party. So today we're going to really drill down into the damage caused by this lurch in the past 2 decades toward the elevation of opinion over facts and expertise. This phenomenon parallels the rise of social media, but it's not entirely defined or caused by it. The opinion card is a broader interpersonal dynamic, one that's also been co-opted by our political system and even by algorithms. Opinions, in short, have become weapons of mass destruction. The way people are choosing to use their freedom of conscience to either employ or fight back against these weapons of mass destruction and the systemic impact of these collective decisions, it's changing our world as never before. So first, we're going to discuss the revelation this week of an email in which HHS science advisor Paul Alexander recommended intentionally spreading COVID to achieve herd immunity. Rand Paul's admission that he really doesn't want black people to vote. No surprise.
No surprise there.
Cyberwarfare update. Hundreds of U.S. government departments and private companies have been hacked by a foreign government, almost certainly Russia. And the completely unhinged attempts by Republicans to submit alternate electors to change last Monday's electoral college vote. And Trump supporters are now threatening legal action because bookies are paying off election bets. And Dodge City, Kansas mayor, she resigned over death threats because she supported a mask mandate. And people are leaving the Republican Party, and Bill Barr has resigned. But before we get into any of that, I want to remind you to make sure and subscribe to this podcast. We're available on all the major podcast channels. Christoph and I work really hard to bring you great content every week. And of course, making the show is something we both really enjoy. We don't do any advertising yet, so if you like what you're hearing, follow us on social media, leave us a good rating, write a review of our show, and take the time to talk about us on Facebook, blog about us, tell your friends and family. Word of mouth really matters. Also, please don't hesitate to email us with any notes or suggestions you have. We love hearing from our listeners.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter at @radicalsecular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
All right, now let's get into the t-shirts. I'm wearing a t-shirt that is, I think, highly appropriate for today. It is a really nice design of a 1984. War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength.
So great. And I love it, Sean. And I think it's really interesting because I'm wearing also a 1984 shirt. And we didn't talk about this before the episode, by the way. Like, I didn't know what you were going to wear. You didn't know what I was going to wear. And we just happened to come to the same conclusion about what shirts to wear. I'm wearing a shirt. It says 84 on the front. And I really can't turn around, I guess. But it says, maybe I'll try. I'll give it a shot.
Let's see it. Come on. Yeah, Orwell 84. It's like a football jersey.
Exactly. And this is a retread, but it's so relevant today because, again, we are going to be talking about, at least from my perspective, a lot of what we're talking about today is about power, right? And it's about and power for its own sake, right? Not even for the sake of advancing a particular agenda or certainly not helping Americans or people or the world. Power, the pursuit of power for its own sake. And I think that a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, that'll be a theme, I think, that runs through a lot of what we're talking about today.
Definitely. And I think what's really interesting and what we're finding out now is that we worried about Big Brother, but we've actually become Big Brother. We're doing this to ourselves. And this is the tyranny of opinion, the tyranny of belief. And we're seeing it right now. And that's what we're going to go into on this show today. And I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
But first, let's start off with the news. And we start off with this week, American COVID-19 fatalities at 325,000. And with this bombshell report from Politico that HHS science advisor Paul Alexander called in a July 4th email for millions of Americans to be infected as a means of fighting COVID-19. Of course, we know that Trump mishandled the pandemic from the beginning and that his do-nothing strategy, it was a de facto call for herd immunity. But nobody was actually saying that out loud. Knowing what we know now about COVID mortality rates and what we talked to Joe last week about is that they can be as high as 5 to 10% or more without lengthy and expensive intensive care treatment. So a herd immunity strategy is a deliberate plan to kill at least 2 million Americans or more, possibly many more. And we would get to that number if it wasn't for the vaccine. The only thing that's going to save us and save us from having millions of deaths is this vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Politico quotes that. I got to read this because this is insane. This is a plan. You want to talk about the plandemic? Here it is right here. Okay.
That's a really great point. This is the fucking plandemic here.
Yeah. Yeah. So he says, infants, kids, teens, young people, young adults, middle-aged with no conditions, etc., have zero to little risk. So we use them to develop herd immunity. We want them infected, Alexander added. It may be that it will be best if we open up and flood the zone and let kids and young folk get infected in order to get natural immunity or natural exposure, Alexander wrote on July 24th to Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Stephen Hahn, Michael Caputo, and 8 other senior officials. Caputo subsequently asked Alexander to research the idea according to emails obtained by the House Oversight Committee's Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus. Alexander also argued that colleges should stay open to allow COVID-19 infections to spread, lamenting in a July 27th email to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Robert Redfield that we essentially took off the battlefield the most potent weapon we had, younger, healthy people, children, teens, young people, who we needed to quickly infect themselves, spread it around, develop immunity, and stop the spread.
Oh, man. Like, as I said just a few minutes ago, right? Like, power for its own sake. And because this is just appalling. I mean, like, one has to wonder what the actual goal here, right? I mean, because there is, you got to know that if you carry through this plan, that millions and millions of people are going to die, and also just the naivety of thinking, wow, like it's somehow going to be contained within young people. I mean, I don't even understand how this logic works.
They're talking out of both sides of their mouths because obviously fascism is in favor of eliminating the weak, right? Culling the weak.
Right.
And so at the same time, though, these guys are saying, let's expend the young and the strong because they're not affected. Well, it turns out that they are being very much affected with long haul symptoms. There's amputations, there's strokes, there's mental problems, there's sterility and impotence and all kinds of issues that are cropping up with COVID. And these people had no scientific understanding of what was going on. This was convenient for them politically. Yep. So it's like, let's infect everybody and that way we'll just get it. And we won't have any more of these lockdowns and it'll be fine.
Exactly. And reckless. And the whole idea, right, is that, like you say, it was a political calculus. It was always a political calculus. It was always like, how can we, keep the economy going, right? That was always the gist, because I think they did know. They always knew, like, let me put it a different way. If there were no COVID-19 and the economy kept going the way it was, Trump would have sailed to re-election, sailed to re-election, and we would have been sitting here right now, depressed, and screaming at the camera. But we're still screaming at the camera because there's a lot of fucked up things still happening. But nevertheless, this was a political calculation, and it just goes to show how it is never about improving the lives of Americans. Never, ever, ever with these people. It is always about power for its own sake, or sort of dealing and keeping wealthy donors happy.
Yeah, that's it. And speaking of which, Rand Paul. He just admitted this week.
People.
He does not want black people to vote. Now, he didn't use the word black people, but he talked about in this article that, if too many people voted, if you registered too many people, that it could affect the outcome of the election, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Donald
crazy thing to say. Well, of course it would. People would vote. I mean, that's how elections work.
Ideally, I mean, theoretically, right?
Theoretically,
every citizen has a right to vote, but they don't want it to happen. So Donald Trump earlier this year said if we let everyone vote, Republicans would never win another election. And this gives new meaning to the Republican concept of voter fraud, right? Because to many Republicans, simply letting communities of color vote in a free and fair election constitutes fraud.
Right.
And, listen to what he said in Mother Jones. One day after falsely claiming to Congress that the presidential election had been stolen from Donald Trump, Senator Rand Paul, Kentucky, is warning that higher voter turnout in the upcoming Georgia runoffs will hurt Republicans. Paul is the most recent of a number of GOP elected officials who have asserted that low voting rates are key to their electoral success. They're mailing out a solicitation to vote by mail, Paul said during a Thursday Fox Business segment that condemned Georgia's voter outreach efforts amid the pandemic. That is not in the state law. Really?
Oh, and by the way, all of a sudden, you, Rand Paul, care about what the government is telling you, telling people to do or not do? Come on, Rand Paul. Your entire shtick is we don't need government intervention. So all of a sudden, you're like, oh well, the law is what we should be following here. And look, and the law is what law keeps you from doing things. It doesn't tell you to do things. What are you talking about? So of course, the law doesn't say that you have to do voter outreach, and therefore we shouldn't do it. Again, no. Bad faith, man. Just bad fucking faith. Come on.
Look, the only counties they audited, I think it was in Michigan, were the large counties with a lot of black people voting. Like they left all the other counties, no recounts, no nothing. And the same thing in Wisconsin. Let's just recount the black votes.
Like, I mean, it's so see-through, Sean. And and this is an issue that is, near and dear to my heart, voter suppression. First of all, concepts of justice matter to you as well. They matter to me deeply, particularly as I've talked a lot about this on this show, particularly in the last couple months I've been reading Black Reconstruction by Du Bois, and I talk about it pretty much every show because it's relevant in every single show, because the connections between Reconstruction in America and all the problems we're having today they're basically a straight line, right? So, but what I'm seeing here is the same old tactics, the same old naked defense of hierarchy and white power. Let's call it what it is, white power, right? That is what we are seeing here. And the excuse is different. It used to be a little bit more plausible. It's like back in Reconstruction days, they were saying black people shouldn't vote because they are uneducated and et cetera, which was true, of course, because black people had been enslaved and literally deprived of education for 400 years. So that was true then. Now, they don't even bother with the education piece. It's just that, oh no, they explicitly say we just don't want those people to vote. I'm actually, one of the things about the Trump era that I love is that all of the bullshit that has been under the radar and has been plausibly denied by the GOP for the last 30 years is now outright on the fucking table. They don't even pretend to care about that stuff anymore.
No, and I remember reading in like 2015 and being shocked because in the post-Reconstruction era, when the federal troops left and there was nobody enforcing elections, there were multiple instances of black people who were elected and then they refused to seat them in the state legislatures in the South.
Yep.
It was widespread. If this was not even like, they didn't even pretend. They're just like, nope, sorry, we're not seating you.
Yep. It has been the same fucking temper tantrum, man. It has been we talked about temper tantrums last week and we're talking about it again here. It has been every time white power gets any challenge to its dominance, there is an outrageous temper tantrum that happens. And I mean, it happened after Obama's election, right? The Tea Party was a gigantic temper tantrum against the fact that there is a black man in the White House. And Donald Trump was is the manifestation of a white temper tantrum, the manifestation of that.
Well, and after Obama was elected, the Kochs just opened the checkbook and,
Yep.
and got that Tea Party going. So it's it's always big money, big white money, basically, when it's
Absolutely
involved. Okay, and our next news item is about this terrible hack. Okay, U.S.
Scary
officials.
stuff.
The BBC reported this. U.S. officials have warned that a major hacking campaign uncovered this week poses a grave risk to the government, critical infrastructure, and the private sector. The U.S. Treasury and Commerce departments were among those attacked. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, said thwarting the attack would be highly complex. Many suspect the Russian government is responsible. It has denied the claims as baseless.
Yeah, come on. Come on. We know who did it.
In a statement on Thursday, CISA said that government agencies, critical infrastructure entities, and private sector organizations had been targeted by what it called an advanced persistent threat actor beginning in at least March of 2020. So, of all the other things 2020 is, it was the year of the hack as well.
Right.
The actor behind the hacks demonstrated patience, operational security, and complex tradecraft in these intrusions, it said. So if anything here, the BBC report kind of understates the severity of this attack, which included the Energy Department and the National Nuclear Security Administration, which maintains the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. Folks, this is close to home here. I mean, they are inside our Nuclear Security Administration.
Yeah.
You know, we always knew this was coming. People have been warning for years about a cyber 9/11. And there's been plenty of stories about commercial hacks with ransom demands ranging into the millions. And we know that the Maersk shipping company was hacked in 2017 in an attack that ultimately cost over $10 billion in total damages. One company, $10 billion, right? But this attack is on another level. The attackers didn't just steal data. They operated with impunity, with full admin root access in hundreds of government and corporate networks for nearly a year. That's time to plant all kinds of nasty bugs and surprises, things we might never know about until we try to fight a war or the power grid goes down or an industrial or nuclear plant suffers a catastrophic accident. Furthermore, actions taken by these attackers with that kind of extensive access almost certainly included covering their tracks to a level that will take years or even longer to unearth. Entire networks might need to be just ripped out and replaced because some network equipment has like, programmable memory in it that they could load viruses and backdoors into the networking equipment itself, the routers and things like that. So that stuff's got to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Ripped out, thrown away. So during this period of vulnerability, we're sitting ducks. We don't even know what they have control over right now. I mean, imagine that there's a foreign adversary that now has a backdoor to shut down our government or destroy infrastructure on command. This is where we are. And there's no other way to look at this other than it's an act of war. It's probably going to cost us upwards of $1 trillion to fix it. And on the morning of our taping of this show, Donald Trump contradicted his own Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in a tweet saying that the Russians were not involved. I mean...
Oh, boy. Yes. And look, I mean, first of all, the Trump thing, it really, really sort of, because at this point, right, Trump is on his way out the door. I mean, he is ripping down, like looting the building on his way out the door, but he is on his way out the door. You got to wonder why he is still vested in somehow defending Russia. I mean, it might just be that he wants to, he doesn't like the idea that people think that Russia helped him win election in the first place. It might just be his narcissism, which is always some element of it. But you got to wonder what will be uncovered in years to come and what power Russia has over him in terms of oligarchies and in terms of that kind of money. But I think the second issue here, and the more important issue here, is we're talking about a whole new brand of asymmetrical warfare, right? Russia could never go toe to toe. Even Russia is a world power to be sure, but does not have the infrastructure that we have as Americans worldwide, and certainly not the hardware or the money. But they have invested heavily in this kind of digital warfare, and it doesn't take a billion-dollar standing army to pull that kind of thing off. Right now, you have we dealt with asymmetric warfare in the 80s, the 90s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, 90s, through Nicaragua, all the way to the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're going to be dealing with asymmetric warfare, I think, in the digital space.
Well, there's a really good book. It's called The Red Web. And I would highly recommend, we're going to put it in the show notes, because the Red Web, it goes through kind of the scenario that happened when Boris Yeltsin got in, and this whole happened. It was kind of a little mini coup that happened in Russia when Gorbachev was out, and this all occurred because of the internet, the newly formed internet that was free and open in Russia, and they could no longer control the information. And so this book, The Red Web, details step by step how they locked down the internet and how they began to put a whole lot of emphasis on cyber warfare and even controlling their internal media. Everything that Putin did to roll back the reforms that had been put in place by Gorbachev and Yeltsin started with the internet. So
interesting.
His entire presidency and his entire reign, really, which he's now the longest reigning, I guess, Russian head of state ever, since the czars were deposed. So his entire reign is based on this, on dominating this space. So obviously, it's fucking Russia. Come on.
Obviously. And we're going to be talking about this later on. It's really interesting that we're talking about this, because it just goes to show how the democratization of information that the internet brought us, right? It's sort of like the Arab Spring, right? It starts with this democratization force, but is so quickly co-opted by instruments of power, and it becomes an even more intense and effective way of controlling a population. And we're going to talk about this later on, but then you had even before there was the internet. So it goes like full circle, right?
And I can't wait to get into it. So let's finish up this news.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so ridiculously, last week, Republicans in 8 states tried to deliver forged electoral votes to their state capitals. Needless to say, this had no impact on the outcome of the electoral vote tally, in which Joe Biden won by 306 to 232 electoral votes as expected. Arizona Central reported that the state GOP's 11 fake electors met as required by no one and cast their non-existent votes for Trump as required by their desperate need to continue to live in Fantasyland.
I love that. So well said.
In Michigan, Newsweek reported these guys actually went to the Capitol in Michigan and tried to get in. While Michigan's Electoral College voters met inside the state Senate building to cast their ballots for President-elect Joe Biden, a group of Republicans identifying themselves as the GOP electors tried to persuade a state police officer to let them into the building so that they could do their constitutional duty and join the electoral voters. The electors are already here. They've been checked in, Michigan State Police First Lieutenant Darren Green told the group assembled outside of the building's side door in a video shot by Detroit Free Press videographer Mandy Wright. The group protested in response, saying that they are the GOP electors. Per the Capitol Commission, per the governor's office, per the Speaker of the House, per the Senate, Green explained while blocking their entry, the Capitol is closed unless you have office business today or you are taking part in the Electoral College process. Anybody else is not permitted to enter. I mean, Christoph, holy shit. It's great to make fun of these guys, but who ever expected them to go this far? What the actual fuck?
I mean, like, what do you even say about this? It is, you have, and what I keep coming back to as I think about this is temper tantrums, right? I find it sort of ironic too that these would be the same people that would be yelling about law and order and people following the rules and respect police and all this sort of thing, except for when these rules are actually imposed upon them, right? And again, I always talk about this bottomless pit of bad faith, right? Come on, right? Like, the rules apply to everyone.
They do, and it's opposite day, right? I mean, they're mad about defund the police, but then they're also mad because this guy who wouldn't close his bar was ramming the police, and now they're mad at they're instead of like saying that guy should be arrested, they're mad at the cops.
Exactly.
It's like,
it's like, come on. Come on, like what is your position? Like what? And again, this and this is this sort of is, as I said earlier in the show, is this sort of theme that I kept coming back to as we were researching this and reading about this show today and preparing for the show today, is that it's always about a naked pursuit of power. Whatever logic, whatever ideas that can be co-opted in service of that ultimate goal, they'll definitely do that, whether that be ramming the police or yelling about those who say defund the police. It doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't matter. And as we saw earlier, they don't even pretend to hide it anymore. They don't.
Well, the same people who are upset about the government and want to mount an insurrection, okay, because of government tyranny, these same people want to put you up against the wall and execute you. I mean, this is what we're dealing with.
It's outrageous. It is out-fucking-rageous.
And of course, they're not just against democracy; they're also stupid. And this is our next item, which is that Insider.com reports that angry Trump bettors are suing Betfair after the bookie paid out Biden bettors. And I found out about this whole thing on a hilarious Twitter feed called Coping MAGA. And if you want some laughs, you should check out Coping MAGA, because these people are freaking the fuck out. And the funny thing about it is that they were sucker bets, okay? Because what was happening is on the night of the election, as the red mirage happened, right, before the mail-in votes were counted, some of these bookies were showing that it was like a 97% chance that Trump was going to win. So you could win big money by putting money down on Trump at that point. So
yeah.
A lot of people did. A lot of these are offshore. They can't know, it's over. They got suckered.
Oh man, it just makes me so happy. It just, our friend Drew, who is a friend of the show, a friend on social media with just the best scathing memes that he posts. But we were chatting, I think, back and forth. He also randomly sent me, I don't know if he sent them to you, Sean, these like YouTube videos of the most outrageous rock and roll, like hardcore death metal videos. It's like the most insane stuff. And he'll just message me just like, I just thought I'd just randomly send you this. Anyway, he's a great guy. We love Drew. Shout out to Drew. But the point is that he has these great memes about how, this unraveling of the MAGA universe and how funny it is, and the Schadenfreude and the whole thing. It's just beautiful to watch. It's beautiful to watch. It's scary, obviously. Yeah, all this is a caveat, right? It's a caveat, right? On one side, we can laugh about it, and you said this earlier in the show, right? We can laugh about this on one end, but there's like also real death on the other side of it. So it's like gallows humor, right? It
really is, and that's why again, the Coping MAGA Twitter feed is just full of this stuff. It's just Schadenfreude central, But again, no laughing matter. Our next news item is that CNN reported that Dodge City, Kansas Mayor Joyce Warshaw has resigned after supporting a mask mandate.
Yep.
Warshaw was the target of vicious harassment, receiving threatening calls and emails for simply telling the citizens of her city to comply with public health directives. Realize, folks, this is Kansas, okay? And all throughout the first and second waves of COVID, Dodge City had no mask mandate until November 16th. They finally started to get their act together. The mayor expressed her support on December 11th in a story that was picked up by USA Today. And in a matter of days, she no longer felt safe being the mayor of her city. This is America, folks.
Yeah, and it's just fucking nuts. And, you have to question why there's this sort of rabid response, right? Like, why is it so? I mean, it's a Trumpian response, right? I mean, Trump embodies this vicious, angry, violent response to these sort of things. And they ironically accuse the left of this, right? The whole cancel culture, their whole opposition to cancel culture. But you're like, wait a second. isn't that exactly what you're doing? And by the way, you're not doing it by just sending some angry tweets. You are sending death threats. Like, come on, right? I mean, this is not a both sides issue. And you can't.
J.K. Rowling is not getting death threats. Louis C.K. is not getting death threats. People who are canceled are we just don't buy their shit.
Exactly. We're just not going to buy their shit, and we're going to hold them accountable socially. We're not going to show up in outside of their homes with AR-15s, right? I mean, and this is the sort of thing that happens on the right.
Well, and you know that, like, okay, the wronger you are about something, the more you have to white knuckle to hang on, and the angrier you have to get, because, and this is the thing, is that Trumpism is so fragile. It's like a house of cards. If one part of it falls, then all of it falls, because if you wear a mask, then you got to pay attention to the climate, and you should probably pay attention to, women's rights. And you should probably, it's like it all comes tumbling down, because this rationale they have is just based on, making liberals cry, which is, there's no argument. There's no actual rational argument. It's just make liberals cry. And this is what it comes down to. We know that fish rots from the head, and all this COVID denialism is coming from the Trump wing of the GOP and their sycophants in right-wing media. They have to sort of hold up the consistency with the alternative facts. And so they can't even there can't be one chink in the armor of these alternative facts. And so anyone who doesn't toe the Trump line is being labeled a rhino, a Republican in name only. And increasingly, that even includes people who support fair elections.
Which is insane. That is insane. So the idea that, you are now going to be kicked out of the GOP if you are in support of free and fair elections. And by the way, these are the same people that are like, my constitution, my rights, right? And it's like, what? I mean, what about, do you not care about, the only amendment they care about is the second one, right? All the other amendments are completely irrelevant. Oh, the First Amendment too, but only the free speech part, and only the free exercise part. The rest of the First Amendment can go.
I got to tell a little anecdote here, and this is hilarious, because you know how the Second Amendment talks about a well-regulated militia, and this is endlessly debated. Okay, but a well-regulated militia means that the militia is accountable to the democratically elected government. That's what regulated means. Okay, and I saw something that was so funny on a gun page where one of these gun nuts was saying that effectively a well-regulated militia just meant that everybody's guns were in working order.
These people really just make up their facts as they go along, don't they? I mean, they really just do. I mean, what is he? Is he one of these libertarian types who says he's read like 15 summaries of the Federalist Papers, and from there he has extracted this nugget of knowledge? What a fucking idiot.
Let me just tell you that in the home of a libertarian or a Christian, the Federalist Papers and the Bible, I mean, they're never opened, okay? They just sit there on the fucking shelf.
Yeah, exactly. They're just performance pieces, right? They're like, they obviously haven't read it, right?
No.
They obviously haven't read it. Because if you've read it, you would be horrified if you've read the Bible, right? and if you've read the Federalist Papers, you believe that there's value there, you can't also be a modern Republican. Those two things cannot coexist.
No. And as a matter of fact, in a small bit of good news, some people are just fucking sick of the hypocrisy, and they're flat out leaving the Republican Party. And there's two notables in the past week, Michigan Representative Paul Mitchell, who became an independent, and longtime Republican Steve Schmidt, who has joined the Democrats, which that's fucking rare, by the way. Okay. I have three things to say about any of these people who are leaving the Republican Party. The first thing is, what the fuck took you so long? I mean, what was it that made you think the Republican Party, even of George W. Bush, was worth being a part of? Okay, so, and number two, why are so many Republicans why do they wait to leave the party until they're retiring from public life? Where are the ones who are still in Congress who will stand up to the nonsense? And there's a few, but mostly they are too scared about their careers and too afraid of being primaried or or a tweet from Trump.
Yep.
And as far as I'm concerned, the third thing is there's little point in leaving the GOP to become an independent, because many independents are just people who support Republican policies, but they're either embarrassed to say so or they're simply disgusted with their party's behavior. But they still want to deregulate. They want to suppress the vote. They want to deny climate change, and they want to cut taxes for the wealthy and all the rest of the ball of wax. So as far as I'm concerned, if you can't bring yourself to join the Democrats, you're still a big part of the problem, which is that you work for the wealthy and against ordinary Americans. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I was reminded when I was researching this question or thinking about this question is, about our yesterday, our mutual friend, Roger Hoffmore, he posted we're friends with him on Facebook, and nice guy. He posted about how libertarians, he had this whole thing about how various types of libertarians and defining libertarians. And of course, that caught my attention because we love beating up on libertarians on this show. It's one of our favorite pastimes. And one of the definitions of libertarian that he talked about was Republican who wants to be cool. Right. Right. And that goes to what you were talking about, right? This idea of I just don't want to be called a Republican. I don't want to be associated with that brand, but really I care about all the same things. Right. So I do understand the desire to differentiate oneself from one party or another. Right. So if for some reason, and this would never happen, but if some reason the Democrats, or maybe it would happen, the Democrats adopted a suite of policies that I was just completely not cool with, and the GOP suddenly became the party of progress, which is just laughable to think about. But yes, if that happened, I would just switch my party identification. But if that would be obvious to me. But at the same time, I understand if that's not going to happen, and if I'm say Bernie Sanders, right, and I'm look, I am really pro most of what the Democrats are about. I will vote for them constantly. I will vote with them constantly. But I want to sort of just express my independence. So my point is that one's party identification counts for a lot, right? Our brains as human beings are tribal. I could see why one wouldn't want to be I don't want to go consort with the enemy, essentially, who has been my sort of political enemy for my entire political career. So I understand that idea. But again, at the end of the day, what I care about are ethical votes versus unethical votes.
Exactly.
That's what I fucking care about. And so if you want to call yourself an independent, fine, but you vote ethically. That means, and you don't get a pass on being a GOP shithead who cuts taxes and cuts services, and then say, oh no, I'm independent though, so don't associate me with all the racism.
They're full of shit. I mean, I'm going to push back on that a little bit because there's this whole thing that says, fiscally conservative, socially liberal. That's the biggest. I hate
that fucking shit.
Look, if you're fiscally conservative, that means fuck poor people. Okay, that's what that means. It doesn't mean anything else. There's no other definition of that term. Fiscally conservative means don't spend money on social services. It means cut taxes for the wealthy. It means fuck poor people. So absolutely. Fuck you if you're fiscally conservative.
And also disproportionately, that also means it also means that you are acting racist, right? Because because as we know, poor people are people of color are disproportionately represented in the lower class, right? So when you are cutting services for these folks and you're yelling at them and then saying, but oh, don't worry though, I'm not racist. Come on. No, all you've done is kicked the can down the liability for your racism down the road a little bit. But the impact, and this is the thing we talk about a lot on this show, is that conservatives don't look at outcomes, right? They look at these ideas in the abstract, right? Freedom in the abstract, the market in the abstract, not outcomes, right? And that's what really matters to actual human beings, are what the policy outcomes are. And that is the problem with libertarianism. And that is the problem with the whole conservative movement as it exists today. And frankly, I mean, a lot of people will agree with me on this, but I think you agree with me on this, Sean, and that is conservatism has always been always been a defense of power. You can call it whatever you want, a counterbalance to liberals, whatever, but ultimately that's what it is always about. And now it's just been revealed clearly for what it is.
It's fucking spineless obfuscation, okay?
Absolutely.
They are trying to figure out a way to keep their hands clean, and not join Democrats. Because here's the thing. Right now, more than any other time in American history that I can think of, except maybe the Civil War, the two parties represent diametrically opposed worldviews. So if you're independent, who are you? You're like that guy standing in between the KKK and the Black Lives Matter saying, can we compromise?
Oh, yes. That's a really great point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think that's a really, really great point. What I was getting at earlier is the idea of is more of like, when I think of an independent that is useful or that I understand, that I can conceptualize, I'm thinking about a Bernie Sanders. I'm thinking even of an AOC, although she calls herself a Democrat, right? These are people who are agitators in some way, and I think there's value to that, but will ultimately vote for Democrats. But that said, I'm thinking about this right now. This is really just extemporaneous now, but I'm thinking, but at the same time, if your goal is, and we talk about this on the show a lot too, and I think last week or maybe the week before, if your goal is to advance various principles, then shouldn't you just get on fucking board with the best chance for that? Because right, when you're doing the Bernie Sanders thing, you are purposefully splitting the party, right? You're purposefully driving a wedge on purpose, right? And you are then and this is one of my biggest criticisms of us on the left, is that we cannot get our act together and work as a group, where on the right, they are really good at that because they're fucking fascists, right? So it's really easy to do that. So that's a real problem there, a tension there that I'm thinking about now as we talk about it.
I don't mind AOC, because AOC is, she calls herself a Democrat. She is a Democrat. And I think a lot of her criticisms within the party are more constructive, whereas Bernie Sanders, not so much in 2020, but certainly in 2016, he attacked.
In 2016, definitely. Like he was a spoiler.
Complete spoiler. So, it's just, look, do you want to walk or do you want to get on the train? That's exactly the question. So if you're an independent, you're walking, and you can't walk as fast as the train. You're not going to get where you're going as quickly as if you just get on board.
Right.
So,
yep.
All right, our last news item. This is kind of a throwaway because, this administration is just petering out and winding down as we speak. But the firing or resignation of Attorney General William Barr. Yay!
Oh.
What do you think?
So one of my favorites. I'm a big Seth Meyers fan. Seth Meyers is fucking hilarious, and his YouTube clips of a closer look, I mean, really are outstanding. I mean, and it's also like sharp political commentary as well. So it's not just jokes, but really it's like watching 15 minutes of stand up. And it is outstanding. But anyway, he always refers to he refers a lot to the MAGA the MAGA comic universe, as if he was talking about Marvel.
Like the MCU, yeah.
yeah, and I think it's just so well done because there's all these characters, right? And they're all and they all sort of are and they're characters in every administration, but these characters are so larger than life because they're buffoons, right? And they are sycophants and they make bad news all the time. So watching that cinematic universe, that's what he calls it, the MAGA cinematic universe. Brilliant. But watching it unravel, as I talked about just before, has been really fun. And fuck Bill Barr. That guy has been, and again, is funny on one side, deadly serious on another. This guy has, he is why he basically put the kibosh on the Mueller report. He has been one of the most dangerous. But he is an advocate of a huge advocate of the religious freedom movement, and also the executions. Right? People, they have been executing people. They have reopened the federal execution sort of circuit in a way that no other president has in
since the 1800s. It's insane.
It's insane.
He's one of Trump's staunchest loyalists, and he has been the whole time. He's basically turned the Justice Department into Trump's personal law firm. Yep. He's a despicable Catholic theocrat, but apparently Trump just got too Trumpy even for him, because he didn't breathe a word about this election conspiracy nonsense, not a fucking word, and that was good.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you know what's really interesting? And I wonder what he's positioning himself for, because Pence also stayed away from this. And there's no doubt that Pence is preparing himself to run in 24. I mean, I think that is a given. And he has, and Pence is, I think, in many ways far more dangerous than Trump, because he's on board with all Trump policies, but he can sell it in a way that harks back to a George W. Bush or even frankly to a Ronald Reagan, right? Ronald Reagan was able to sell deadly racist, deeply racist policies and wrap it in this veneer of Americanism. And I think that is a real danger for Pence going forward. And I bring this up because I wonder if Bill Barr is positioning himself for the future in 24 and at this point, if anyone who is repeating the Trump, the election fraud thing is not going to be taken seriously in the future. And I think he knows that. Yeah.
And it's like, Mike Pence he's more like a preacher, and he's very, very comfortable with the evangelicals, and he is smooth. I mean, that guy is really smooth. Man.
He is a hell of a politician. One of the best, of the best.
His speech at the Republican National Convention this year was like, I was actually kind of scared after that speech. I was like, man, this might work.
Honestly, man, I am terrified of him in 24. I am terrified of him in 24 because there's going to be a lot of Republicans out there. And by the way, independents, conservative independents, right? We talked about independents, conservative independents, right? Who are looking for a hat to somewhere to hang their hat. And if he gives it to them, he gives them Trumpism again, but in a more palatable form, they will happily sign up. They will line up for it, Sean. They're going to line up for it. That is terrifying.
Well, that's the point. And Pence is squeaky clean in terms of he has not gotten down into the gutter with Trump at all.
That's right.
No personal attacks, no mean tweets, none of that stuff. He is clean, and he can actually probably go back after, because some of the evangelicals are getting sick of Trump, and it's not that many, but there's a few, and he'll just bring them right back into the fold.
Oh my God. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And he can demonize Democrats. I mean, you actually have people. I have a friend of mine who's really into DC politics. And she even, she says, oh, Pence is such a nice guy when you can actually meet him and da-da-da. And she's a Democrat, definitely a Democrat, right? She is a liberal. But when you meet, my point is when you meet Pence, when you talk to him, he just seems like a normal guy, and he's really good at that. You have to really get past that shiny veneer that he has to see how horrible and deeply, deeply bigoted his policies are.
No, he's Trump in a suit, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that is it for the news, and this is going to be fun. Let's move on to our main segment, the opinion card. So here we go. The first thing I have to say here is no, you actually don't have the right to your own opinion. You do not, okay? For a lot of people, this is heresy, and they feel like by saying it, I'm going after the jugular of freedom of conscience in general, and I'm not, okay? I hope by the end of this show, you'll understand the paradoxical truth that freedom of conscience is one of our most fundamental and important rights, and yet, if you care at all about maintaining a free and fair civilization, you still don't have a carte blanche to hold any old opinion you feel like. And you might think that my opposition to playing the opinion card makes me a totalitarian, this orthodoxy, liberal orthodoxy, right? But the exact opposite is true. Playing the opinion card without regard to what's actually true leads to totalitarianism. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it happen. And I'm going to explain exactly how and why this works. I mean, and lest we be accused of being hypocrites, because we do express a lot of opinions here on this show, I just want to say we try every day to make sure our opinions are educated. They reflect an honest assessment of reality, and they don't lead people astray. We work, that is our main point of doing the show, is that anything we say on this show has been checked, fact-checked, and vetted. And I want to make this disclaimer then right up front, which is that we're both extremely committed to the facts. And if our opinions ever stray into the realm of contradicting facts, then we are full of shit. You can drag us as much as you want. I mean, here's what I said in a recent post on our Facebook page. Quote, "The radical and radical secular actually does mean something. It means Christoph Defoe and I have pretty much zero tolerance for bullshit from anyone about anything. Are we always right about everything? No, we make mistakes like anyone." And this is the thing. I hate this so much. Okay, this gets thrown in our face, in the face of liberals all the time. You think you know everything. You think you're always right. No, we don't. We can make a mistake. The difference is how we respond when we are confronted with a mistake, okay? And without exception, if we find out that a position we've taken on this show or in life has been contradicted by the consensus of experts or by the scientific or medical community or by history or anything, and any real discipline where there's facts, we immediately change our position. And this is sadly not true for most people. Most people, especially in cults, they white knuckle their positions to the bitter end. We won't do that.
That's absolutely right, man. And the bottom line is you don't get to make up your facts as you go along, right? And this is right. And it's like I see this in conversation, and I'm not even willing to have conversations with people. Like once I start getting into, say, a Facebook conversation or God forbid, an Instagram conversation, as I always say, a hotbed of terrible fucking ideas. When I get into these conversations with people, once people say, for example, plandemic or or race card or all these ideas that reveal that they are in the process of making up the facts that go along. There's no point in having that conversation, Sean. There's no point. And this isn't not arbitrary, right? Like it's not right. When people make up their own facts, these are also people that tend to be toxic, right? When I have had relationships, and this is why I don't tolerate this in my own life. We talked about, you just said, I don't tolerate this fucking bullshit, whether that be coming from a family member, especially, right? Because a lot of people put up with it with family members, with a family member, with a friend, and obviously not in an intimate relationship, which is just, I wouldn't have an intimate relationship with somebody on those grounds. But the point is that, like, when people feel comfortable to make up their own facts as they go along, and then there is no baseline of truth upon which to have a meaningful relationship, let alone a meaningful conversation. Like, you really just can't. And it ends up being really dangerous, really toxic. And again, I look back at some of my youth and some of the more toxic relationships I've had, including with family members. And it comes down to this idea of, I get to make up my own facts, whether that be a religion, whether that be a moral system, or whatever it is. And I just don't have time for it, Sean. I don't have fucking time for it. And we don't have time for it on this show, and certainly not on our fucking Facebook page.
No, I mean, and this is the point. It is people, they destroy any respect that you could have for them. There are things that are disqualifying statements. Once you've made those statements, it's done. There's no possible conversation after that. And it's like, there's a lot of people who think we should still continue to have dialogue once these disqualifying statements have been made, and you can't. And so I want to talk about— All it does is hurt you. Right? It's like, because that person's never going to change. There is no because they make up their own facts as they go along. There's literally no basis upon which for them to say that I was wrong. And so, what is there to talk about? There's nothing to talk about. The only person who ends up getting harmed, the only thing that happens in that conversation, Sean, is that I walk away feeling really shitty. That's it. That's all that happens. It's a waste of time. And if you don't have loyalty to the truth, it's not about your opinion versus my opinion. It's the truth. And
exactly.
We all have to be on that quest. And if it becomes clear that somebody is not on that quest, they're just interested in flogging some point of view, it's over. Conversation over. All right. And I want to quote, this is a really interesting article or editorial in the New York Times by Thomas B. Edsall. The editorial the headline was, "America, we have a problem." And in it, he's actually talking to Steven Pinker.
Woo! We love Steven Pinker.
That's why that jumped right out at me. I had to put that in the show because... Okay, so here it goes. Steven Pinker, a professor of psychology at Harvard, says, humans can believe things for two reasons. Because they have grounds for thinking they're true, or to affirm a myth that unites and emboldens the tribe, Pinker wrote. And this is a really important point that Pinker is making here, which I'll talk more about later, which is that many, if not most, opinions are strictly performative. People don't even believe it. It's just a tribal identification, right?
Yep.
So he continues, any fair weather friend can say that rocks fall down, but only a blood brother would be willing to say that rocks fall up. But usually reality imposes limits on how far we can push our myths. What's extraordinary about the present moment is how far most Republicans have gone in endorsing beliefs that are disconnected from reality and serve only to bind the sect and excommunicate the unfaithful. That is a cult, folks. That's a description of a cult. And I ought to know because, and Christoph, you know too, because we fucking grew up in a cult.
Absolutely.
All right, so editorial continues. The key but unanswerable question, Pinker continued, is how strongly reality will push back once Trump's power and pulpit are diminished. There undoubtedly will be lost cause warriors and post-1945 Japan-style cave fighters, and it would be nice to think that they will eventually be marginalized by their own preposterousness. But myths can persist within a closed network when belief in them is enforced by punishment. So a denialist GOP faction could survive for a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you know, we love Steven Pinker on this show. I know I do, along with Sam Harris's books, although we have our issues with Sam Harris, which is an understatement. But really, reading those books years ago on your recommendation, actually, Sean, was really revolutionized my worldview. And it's a huge part of sort of this philosophy of life that I'm building out and in my Just Words Fallacy project and on my writings, and this like a worldview premised on these ideas. The ideas we're talking about, right? Truth and commitment to truth, both as a matter of policy and as a matter of individual, like sort of ordering in one's individual life. And in particular, I recommend The Blank Slate, and I know I've done this already on this show, and Better Angels of Our Nature. Both are just like outstanding books that were just, I don't know, put things in perspective. The most recent one is really good too, Enlightenment Now. But I think that those two earlier ones are sort of fundamental. But to respond directly to what you're talking about, Sean, like it really, the GOP today, and certainly the Trump GOP today, has all the hallmarks of a cult, right? That sort of toxic tribal environment. And it harks back to, I remember last week you asked why Giuliani keeps doing this. I think you asked him, like, why does he keep doing this? Why does he keep making a goddamn fool of himself this way, right? And I was reminded then, I'm reminded now, of Cohen, the fixer, who in his testimony before Congress, and he said, when you're in that orbit, right, in the Trump orbit, there's this loyalty, it's almost like a psychosis that happens with people, and you and I have seen this in the cult environment, right, where the leader really becomes godlike, right? And you are in this almost like a extended trance where you're willing to throw your own well-being under the bus just to get that positive reinforcement from the cult leader.
Well, there's only one real true purpose of any cult, and that is to protect the leader. Whatever other purpose, whatever other goals, teachings, blah, 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 the goal of a cult is always to protect the leader. And if the leader dies, to protect the organization. Okay.
Right.
So we've seen that with Scientology. You know, they successfully continued after L. Ron Hubbard died. And now they have this guy, David Miscavige, who is at the middle of the whole thing. And he's probably more insane than Hubbard. And,
Exactly.
you know, but everything in that organization, which is a criminal organization, like almost all cults, is designed to protect that guy and his authority and his power. And we're seeing the exact same thing. I mean, Trumpism might as well be Scientology.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. It has all the hallmarks of a cult, and we are watching people throw their careers away rather than deal with this. Right? Bill Barr, even as he retires, or I'm sorry, leaves the administration, he wrote this sycophantic letter. The letter was sickening to listen how he licked Trump's boots.
Oh,
it was
not just boots. This was an ass tonguing.
It was an ass tonguing, man. He definitely tossed the man salad. And you know that Trump was still going to shoot out. He knows Trump is still going to shit on him, but he needs that recognition. I mean, his commitment to undermining the rule of law and to theocracy is so strong that he was ready, that he knows he has to preserve his credibility. And I think that's probably why he left, as I mentioned earlier, but he still needed to toss the salad before he left.
I know. It was sickening. I mean, he might not even written the letter, to be honest, but allowing someone else to write a letter and then put his name on it is just as bad.
Just as bad. You might as well have written it, because he endorsed it. He endorsed it by putting his name on it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to our next section, where I'm going to give a shout out to my longtime friend and listener from Eureka, California, Daryl Scott Collins. And he sort of inspired this show because he's someone who continually warns about the dangers of the opinion card, seeing it for what it really is, which is the death of democracy and a one-way ticket to concentration camps. And the funny thing is that I've sort of adopted a lot of these Darrylisms over the years, because the guy is downright hilarious when it comes to what I would call his cutting edge anti-fascism, which includes skewering the sort of soft, hypocritical underbelly of Confederates, libertarians, Nazis, Republicans, and Christians, often in the same sentence.
Often, yes.
Because they're often the same people. So I got to share some of this stuff with you. He often says, "Praise fake Jesus and hail fake Satan." And you got to love it, because as we all know damn well here on the Radical Secular, Jesus and Satan are both a couple of goddamn mythical characters that get way, way too much attention in our world. And so we got to say, this is our prayer here today. So fuck both of them in Daryl's name.
Yeah, he's great.
So he also came up with the idea of the industrial wood chipper as the modern guillotine to be wielded against fascists. Okay, now this is all fantasy. We have to have fun, because otherwise we'd cry. So
exactly.
We liberals believe strongly in the rule of law. We do not support the death penalty. We do not support torture. So don't you dare accuse us of that, okay? But Americans are dying right now by the thousands from something that was ultimately preventable. And people in positions of power made genocidal decisions. So when it comes to those people, or those who we know are stockpiling weapons to overthrow our government, or are planning to commit mass shootings of our citizens, or they're openly encouraging still more waves of this American genocide by, spreading false information or not wearing masks, someday, I'm not going to lie, it can be a pleasant fantasy to think about them going into the wood chipper feet first.
Feet first is the best part, for sure.
I mean,
because they're going to have to experience it, right?
in slow motion,
in slow-mo.
I mean, but really, would it be a bad fantasy to think about those people dying to save the republic, if only a fantasy? I mean,
yeah,
come on.
I know.
So, and there's Daryl's best gem of all is what he says to people. He says, "Go fuck both of your parents."
It's great.
It works on so many levels to shut down bullshitters. I've never seen anybody really come back from that. And There's even a kind of a pseudo polite version, which is, I think you have an urgent appointment to go fuck both of your parents.
Yeah, I love Daryl. I thought we follow each other on Facebook and on social media, and he is always hilarious, always on point. And and as I always say on this show, like it's so important that I love recognizing the people that watch and listen and support, because it matters a great deal. And on top of all that, we always get a really amazing laugh. And again, it's not just funny because it's cutting commentary on the state of our nation. It always is, and Daryl's great for that.
He really mixes this, the profound with the hilarious, which is what I like about him. And these statements from him which I'm about to quote here, are actually very deadly serious. And he says, "This is how the Holocaust happened. Objectivity derided as subjectivity, and reality destroyed by the opinion card." And then he says, "Naziness 101, the opinion card. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. Therefore, everyone's opinion is equally valuable." And, this is fucking serious. And he's making an obvious connection that all of us who support science and facts already know. And I'm not going to requote Hannah Arendt again, because I'm like a broken record when it comes to that. her quote from The Origins of Totalitarianism, it basically says the same thing, which is that, everyone's an expert, and the corollary that there's no difference between truth and falsehood, and the political qualifier, which is both sides are equally full of shit, because that's what fascism is at its core, which is the denial of objective truth, the elimination of any and all impartial referees, whether in academia, they always go after that, the news media, public officials who are skilled civil servants, they go after them. And this is the way fascism works. It's not a joke. When everyone's opinion is given equal weight in the public mind and both sides are equally bad, that is the prime precondition for democracy to devolve into totalitarianism. And we're pretty damn far down that road. And this brings up another Daryl quote, which is, he says, "When nobody is in charge, then everybody's in charge. Then nobody's in charge, and then everybody's in charge."
Very profound.
It's the breakdown of hierarchy in the wrong way. You're breaking down the information hierarchy rather than breaking down the social hierarchy. It's a very insidious tactic.
Yeah, absolutely. And this week, Daryl posted, he had a lot of 1984 posts this week, and I reread 1984 probably maybe a year and a half ago, and I hadn't read it since like high school or whatever, and it was so profound. Now we talk about what it's like to rewatch Star Trek now, after having not watched it in X number of years, and just how much you can get from it, you can extract value, you can extract from it, and insights you can extract from it, with new knowledge and new perspective. And this is absolutely true with 1984. And as I said at the top of the show, power is the end in itself, right? It's not, and I love that quote, the idea that, in 1984 where he says, like the Nazis got it wrong, the communists, the Soviets got it wrong because they wanted to pretend, and maybe they even believed that they would give up power one day, or that that just around the corner there was
the
some
state would wither away.
Exactly. That so around the corner. But like in 1984, he says, no, the party doesn't even pretend that is the goal. The goal is always power in and of itself. And this is what we are seeing. The GOP and the modern GOP and conservative movement is absolutely evolving, and has evolved into that.
Yeah, it's insane, and we really have to ask ourselves. We know, because this is what the show is about. But rhetorically, how did America get so fucked up? How did we get to a place where an election is being questioned by a major political party? That's insane, and it really came down to let's play a game of are you smarter than an expert? Or in the case of way too many people, playing the opinion card means I'm definitely smarter than all the experts, right?
Yep.
Like all the scientists in the world say that climate change is happening, but I know it's a hoax because I went to high school.
Yeah, exactly. Or I went to college, or I just heard someone say that once and it reaffirms what I want to believe around or about the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
it means that I don't have to change my behavior.
And all of these guys, frankly, when you look at the Plandemic movie, or you look at any of these other just epic propaganda pieces, and the people that worked on them, their credentials are shit.
Mm-hmm.
They have some fake degree, or they have no degree at all, or it's pathetic, and they're weighing in on subjects that they just have no qualifications to talk about.
Yep.
And you've heard the George Carlin rant about stupid people. I mean, it's one of his most famous rants. And he said, think of how dumb the average person is, and then remember that half of them are even dumber than that.
Right.
A lot of people get offended by, I mean, he offended everybody, of course, which is what was great about him.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people will call that like ableist. They don't like calling people stupid. But they're now ableism, it can be a real problem, just like all the other isms. There's plenty of people who are ableist who are jerks, but in this case, Carlin was literally just stating the law of averages in a funny way. And as we talked about in our segment on race and IQ, a bell curve tells you that a trait is distributed evenly on that curve across a population. So if you look at the average of intelligence, it would be right in the middle of the curve. And so it's absolutely undeniably true that half of all people are dumber than average. It's fucking mathematically undeniable. So
absolutely.
What this means, though, in a democracy, if you think about it, is that you can actually elect someone if all the below average people, okay, if every below average voter votes for one person plus only one person who's above average, you can elect someone in a democracy. And that explains the election of Donald Trump almost better than any other fact.
Yeah, it sure does, man. And, the GOP, the modern GOP requires, and we talked about it earlier in the show, right? You have to, Rand Paul explicitly coming out and saying, we don't want people to vote. So there's two people that the GOP counts on, right? People that are like incredibly uneducated. Well, first of all, there is the donor class, right? That they know very much what they're doing, right? And they are they may or may not be sort of smart, but they certainly are savvy and they certainly are powerful. So there's those, but there's not a lot of them, right? They just have disproportionate power. And then there are the uneducated people, and then there are the checked out people, right? And that is a critical part, right? Because if all Americans voted, then we wouldn't be in this mess, right? Because GOP policies are deeply, deeply unpopular, right? It is really unpopular for most Americans. If you really broke down what was going on in terms of voter suppression, most Americans would say, well, that doesn't seem right to me, right? If you just laid the facts out instead of watching it through the lens of Fox News or opinion radio, right? So that obfuscation is absolutely central to what keeps the GOP in power, and they know it. And they know it. They're not even. And now this is a theme that I keep coming back to. They're not even pretending anymore. And so the idea that
it's getting thinner and thinner,
the veneer of decency and of commitment to rule of law is getting thinner and thinner.
Yeah. And so I want to move on to with that our next section, which is basically talking about how this opinion thing works and how this enables them. And basically what you're dealing with is that your expressed opinions essentially are your ethics and your personality. They're not separate. You can't just take a person and say, well, this person has opinions. No, that's who you are. And
this drives me crazy. This is why when people are like, yeah, well, he's a MAGA person, but he's just such a decent guy. No, he's not actually, because by definition, being a MAGA person means that you are at best checked out, right?
That's the most charitable interpretation of a Donald Trump vote.
Most charitable. And I because we could go a lot, or you are just a fucking Nazi, right? Yeah. That's the range that we're talking about here.
And you don't want to be anywhere in that range, let me tell you.
No, you don't want to be in that fucking range.
I mean, okay, so let's talk about this because everybody is into this whole thing, the First Amendment, okay? The First Amendment, when it comes to speech, as we repeat over and over again, all that means is that the government can't do anything to you for saying something.
Yep.
And it gives you the right to freedom of conscience. There's no thought crime. You can think what you want. You can say what's on your mind. But that's not the same. First of all, it doesn't cover private companies. You can be fired. You can lose friends. You can be divorced. All kinds of things can happen to you for saying the wrong thing. So don't fucking pretend that the First Amendment protects you from life. Okay.
Yeah. And that actually ties into the uneducated piece right here, because you have these Trumpists all the time, like, we believe in free speech, and if that company fired that person for saying that's what. No, those are just those are social consequences. Yeah. You're not free to be. You're not. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from social consequences, and it shouldn't. Right.
No, and you can and you should be judged by your fellow citizens for what you believe and what you say, because it reflects who you are. So not only do you tell people what you believe whenever you open your mouth, but you will also immediately reveal your ethics or lack thereof. Okay. And this is one of the biggest spectacles of the internet age, is watching someone spout some horrifying, racist, sexist, or completely ignorant bullshit on social media. And then they claim, when you come back at them, they're like, you don't know me.
It's like, oh no. I know you, my friend, because the fact that you are willing to even utter that the fact that, frankly, that those ideas are even in your head, I know everything I need to know about you. I know everything I need to know about you, because if you were a decent person, you would, let alone say this out loud. Right. These ideas wouldn't really receive any credence within your own mind.
No, I mean, and so by saying these things, by repeating MAGA bullshit, or by just saying generally racist, clueless, checked out things, taking issue with transgender pronouns, whatever the fuck. Okay, you just told me exactly who you are. And being ethically blind is like a form of Dunning-Kruger. People who are reprehensible, they lack the capacity to know how reprehensible they are. And, this is the problem with, some people say, oh, it's about education. People need to be more educated or whatever. No, that's not how it works. Expecting people who behave terribly to understand when they're doing and saying terrible things is like expecting someone who's drunk to know when to stop drinking. It doesn't work. The only way we educate people about their terrible behavior is to subject them to stark social consequences. And this is the problem with social media. We're going to talk a lot about this coming right up here. Social media provides no consequences. Instead, it gives people the ultimate platform for grandstanding, and oftentimes grandstanding their sociopathy, and they use it. Surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really, really great point that you mentioned. I think that's going to be the extracted quote for next week, and that is expecting people to understand. Expecting people who behave terribly to know they're behaving terribly is like expecting someone to know when they're too drunk to drive, right? Like, that is a really great analogy. I think that's an outstanding analogy, because it's like, no, they are living in a paper bag. They cannot see their way out of the paper bag. That's the fucking problem. And you're absolutely right about social media. And this harks back to what I was talking about early on, and that is the democratization of information has come full fucking circle, right? Full fucking circle. Now, right, everyone can say everything they want. Yay. But wait a second. Everyone can say everything they want. That's bad, right? I mean, that is why.
Very bad.
Very bad. That's very bad, because a lot of people have really terrible ideas and have no idea that they have terrible ideas.
No. And, if you don't realize what you're doing, you're still going to tell everyone exactly who you are and what tribe you belong to. It's just going to leak out of your mouth. And anyone who's not a completely dull knife, who's watching you or listening to you, can generally observe your political and social views from just listening to a few sentences out of your mouth. especially if those sentences contain open bigotry. And that goes double if you're punching down, making fun of poor people or black people or disabled people or trans people or you name it, right? You're punching down, you're fucking deplorable. And, those of us who care about ethics definitely damn well do know you. And when you do that, and we fucking know a sociopath when we see one, and we're fucking tired of you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fucking crazy, man. It is fucking crazy. We see you, right? You like, and by the way, just saying I'm a libertarian, right? That means a couple things. That means you are ethically blind, or it means you are just, as I said earlier, unbelievably naive and don't understand that with freedom comes freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin.
You're self-interested, you're ignorant of history, you're ignorant of how power works, you're ignorant of what happens when you have weak government. I mean,
you don't care. And that, right? Or you don't care. You know that stuff and you don't care. And that's even worse. But that goes to your point about ethics, right? We know exactly what your ethics are. The minute you open your mouth, we know exactly what your ethics are. And especially if you're running around with a beard and a fucking IPA talking about I'm a libertarian, we know exactly who the fuck you are. We know exactly who the fuck you are. Go back on your weird bicycle or whatever you've been creating in your basement.
And the thing about it is that I know, we're dealing in stereotypes here a little bit.
Of course.
But that's okay. That's okay, because social media has revealed that we live in a nation of out and proud sociopaths. And these people are everywhere. So the stereotype, it's there for a reason, okay? It didn't, social media didn't create these people, but it gave them a chance to be proud of themselves, to connect with, and to reinforce other sociopaths without any consequence.
And Trumpism too, right? Trumpism is a vehicle for this kind of sociopathy. Like this is the go ahead that they've been waiting for, right? It's okay to not care about other people. In fact, it's okay to want other people to hurt. That is what Trumpism gives people gave permission, and frankly, it'll continue to, because Trumpism's not going anywhere. It continues to give people that kind of permission.
Well, it's a flipping of ethics upside down, like where it's good to make liberals cry because liberals care about people. So if you're making people cry who care about people, that means you don't care about people. And so this is the ethical blindness, and it's highly correlated with stupidity. Okay, it absolutely. What we've done in the 30 years since George Carlin's stupid rant is we've introduced that stupid half of the people to a system where they can log onto their computers and phones and say whatever they want, no matter how stupid. And a bunch of their stupid, ethically challenged friends will emphatically agree with them and provide tribal reinforcement. So social media, it's ground zero for the opinion card. And it's nothing but opinions. I mean, other than the occasional news article that you're just scrolling through just an endless sewer of opinions. And this is Facebook's business model. It's a place where 2.7 billion of Earth's citizens engage in performative socio-political combat. And this is a place where all the normal ground rules of debate have been tossed out the window in favor of flogging an ever greater sense of micro-tribalism. This open sociopathy translates into cliques, and it translates into a race to the ethical bottom.
Yeah.
More clicks, more money, less ethics. So these arguments, as we all know, I mean, this is 10 years ago, this happened. Social media arguments have lost any tether to reality. It's just endless permutations of my tribe is right and the other tribe is stupid and evil. And this is especially a recipe for disaster when one of the tribes really is stupid and evil. And, it's what Steven Pinker said. Only a blood brother will say that rocks fall up and insist passionately that they do as a way of professing loyalty. And so in this profit-driven social media ecosystem, though, the system doesn't care whether rocks fall up or down, only that people keep arguing about it. And this is the key point maybe of this whole episode. And this is something that has, been said many times over and over again. But we have to keep this in the front of our mind, because if we don't, we just keep misunderstanding what's happening. We're being presented with a flawed picture of who and what America is because of this amplification. And maintaining an actual truthful platform would cost Facebook a fortune. Truth has become a profit killer. Not just a, we're talking about half the audience here. What is there any solution to this, or what do you think?
Man, this is a terrifying development, and we're going to talk about this article in the Doomsday Machine. But I've been thinking a lot about this, and one of the things that, and I've talked about this on the show a lot. We frequently come back to a bunch of sort of the same themes. Remember, at the end of last show, after we got off the air, we were talking about how if it seems like we always talk about the same stuff, but it's because because what we're trying to do here is boil these ideas down to their essence and find out what why we're here and what drives these ideas. And one of those ideas that I come back to a lot, and I came back to as I thought about this, is that this just huge misalignment between, and it's always been this way, capitalist goals and running a successful society. Those two goals are sometimes they interact well, but a lot of times they don't. Most of the time they are not the same. And in the Facebook model, we have finally gotten to the point, and which is unprecedented, with that one organization can impact the entire globe simultaneously, right? And that, I think, is like a dangerous threshold that we've crossed. But the underlying problem, the misalignment between capitalist interests and, right, the fucking climate change, the most obvious example, right? Like the capitalist goal and the politician's goal are not always the same, although they are becoming more and more the same, which frankly is a lot of what we're talking about on the show too, right? The sort of the confluence of those two issues. Anyway, my point is that Zuckerberg is terrifying, and we're going to talk about this article, but that misalignment of values is costing us, and it's costing us lives. It's cost us now. It's going to cost us 500,000 lives before COVID-19 is over, for example.
And that's just in the United States.
Just in the United States, exactly.
We forget that, I think I looked at the latest figures, and 1.6 million people around the world have died of COVID. So
it's insane.
It's absolute insanity. But getting back to how we got here, and that's, I think, what the reason why we keep talking about the same themes is because, none of us could have predicted before the election that half of the Republican Party would have been, or more than half of the Republican Party would have been in favor of overturning the election results. That's just never, but what we did talk about in almost every episode is the process of how we got to this point. And so it's almost like we keep repeating these things because they're not getting through.
That's right.
People are still shocked that this would happen, but this is the process. We're describing the process right here. Let's take an example. Let's say that half the people in the world passionately but falsely believe that rocks fall up, and the other half correctly believe that rocks fall down. Any form of universal mandatory fact-checking would piss off and alienate half the audience. And this is why this hasn't caught on, because facts and power have become opposed to each other at this point. If social media companies excluded everyone, or the Republican Party, frankly, excluded everyone who belonged to the rocks fall up tribe, their engagement and their profits would fall by half, and the Republicans would never win an election. So you see the problem.
Great analogy between that's a great analogy right there.
Well, yeah, because it's like, because money and power are really two sides of the same coin, right?
Exactly.
So if you're a capitalist trying to make money, or if you're a Republican trying to win an election, you don't care really how it happens. You just want it to happen.
Exactly. You just want the power.
So we got to use an analogy because of how destructive this is, and bear with me because the article is it's in the Atlantic, and it's called "The Doomsday Machine." It's by Adrian LaFrance, and it describes a thought experiment from the Cold War that may seem like it might be a little unrelated at this point, but you got to let's follow this through. Okay, imagine a device built with the sole purpose of destroying all human life. Now, suppose that machine is buried deep underground, but connected to a computer which is in turn hooked up to sensors in cities and towns across the United States. The sensors are designed to sniff out signs of the impending apocalypse, not to prevent the end of the world, but to complete it. So what this device does, if radiation levels suggest nuclear explosions in, say, 3 American cities simultaneously, the sensors notify the doomsday machine, which is programmed to launch several nuclear warheads in response. At that point, there's no going back. So the US never actually built such a machine, but the Soviets did. It was called Dead Hand, and it was designed to carry out massive nuclear retaliation even after the deaths of Soviet leadership. And that's a whole other fascinating subject, which I would love to do a show with you on sometime on how the risks of nuclear war have evolved over the decades, because it's fascinating and frightening that we've gone, now we're coming up on close to a century of having lived with nuclear weapons and not really ever seen any kind of global apocalypse. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, not a bad outcome. And I like, you're right, understatement of the year. But it also, I'm thinking about this now, and what's kind of scary about it is that we got to this place with the mutually assured destruction sort of, which is basically a power dynamic, right? Like that is sort of like a traditional, more conservative way of addressing a problem, right? Which is using power, I think. And on the other hand, like the nuclear non-proliferation agreements are more of a progressive approach to that. And both of those things have been really, really important in how we got here. I mean, I think it goes to show that there is value in using just power, right? I mean, Reagan, for all the criticism we can have of Reagan, and by the way, I'm planning a show in the next couple of weeks where we're going to do a From Reagan to Trump show.
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be really interesting. Tune in for that. We're going to have a lot to say about that. But the point is that what Reagan did was he wrestled with that sort of mutually assured destruction system and ratcheted that up. And that was enough to get, I think, the Soviets sort of to the table. But ultimately what has worked going, and I think liberals need to understand power better and understand how to use that to our advantage. And then you can use the nuclear non-proliferation agreements, right? Once you have wrangled somebody onto the table, we need to do that with the GOP. We can work with the GOP once we can wrangle them to the table of reasonableness,
Well, and this is what's interesting about this is there's sort of a corollary between this question and the conflict between nationalism and the balance of power theory versus internationalism and a global government and the rule of law. Okay. And this is really the two poles in this conversation is, are you going to go with a legal regime or are you just going to go with realpolitik, and balance of power? And so MAD represents one and non-proliferation and the UN represent the other pole.
Exactly.
You could probably guess where I'm going with this. And, the doomsday machine is just an analogy. The article compares the existence of Facebook to just such a doomsday machine. It's a bit of a stretched metaphor on one hand, but so long as you understand that the Facebook doomsday machine operates in very, very, very slow motion. It's just as deadly, though, as an auto launcher for nuclear missiles, because Facebook is now one of the most powerful entities on Earth. It resembles a radical libertarian uber global government with 2.7 billion citizens. Its main service to its citizens is to misinform and divide them. And it collects its taxes in the form of advertising revenue, which the citizens that ultimately pay for. So this quasi-government of Facebook, it shapes real governments and it plays a role in shaping real and often terrible events. Quoting from the article again, Facebook is an agent of government propaganda, targeted harassment, terrorist recruitment, emotional manipulation, and genocide. A world historic weapon that lives not underground, but in a Disneyland-inspired campus in Menlo Park, California. Unlawful militant groups use Facebook to organize. Government officials use Facebook to mislead their own citizens and to tamper with elections. Military officials have exploited Facebook's complacency to carry out genocide. Facebook inadvertently auto-generated jaunty recruitment videos for the Islamic State featuring anti-Semitic messages and burning American flags. I mean, can you even imagine this? You know, those fucking peppy videos that you get from Facebook at the end of the year. Well, ISIS gets them too.
Right. It's so wild. It's so wild. Like those little like, then, oh, the thumb up, but really it's like burning flags and like training videos. Like, what the fuck?
I mean, this is not a side effect, okay? When you look at it, because Facebook is just entirely agnostic. They don't care. Mm-hmm. And it was basically designed as a social fragmentation grenade. Facebook, it's been divide and conquer since the platform began its life. It began, as we've said many times, as a rating device for the appearance of college women. And, did the world really need a rating system for college women? I don't think so.
Right.
So contrary to Mark Zuckerberg's public claims, Facebook has nothing to do with connection. Mm-hmm. And in a very prescient interview that he gave when he was just 21 years old, Zuckerberg said, Facebook is not a single place on the web, but rather a lot of different individual communities. Mm-hmm. This was the understatement of the century. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the article is excellent. One of my favorite parts of it was when Hillary Clinton is quoted and she talked about talking to Mark Zuckerberg, like she had likened it to, obviously, former Secretary of State. She likened it to talking to a totalitarian or like an authoritarian strongman, leader of a government, which I was like, wow. Mm-hmm. What an insight. Mm-hmm. What an insight. Like, so, and they're a
state. They're a state. I don't want to interrupt you, but I just
go ahead.
They're a state, and it's literally like, she's the Secretary of State and she's having to negotiate with an American company.
Terrifying.
It's terrifying.
I mean, we're living in a world where individual people, and what's crazy about Facebook, right, is that we all know that Zuckerberg holds most of the shares of Facebook. So he's always it's a public company, but really it's just an extension of Zuckerberg, right? So we have, in the most profound sense, a private citizen operating as like a government, as a country. I mean, that is wow.
The dude built a global government starting in his dorm room. I mean, think about that.
Crazy.
So, it's, and all these idiots, the same idiots we were just talking about, okay, mm-hmm. who are like anti-globalist and, these globalist plot. It's like they allowed a guy to build one right under their noses.
Right.
And oh, by the way, it's not the United Nations. It's Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg, right? But interestingly, maybe you'd think he went with the blue for like the connecting it to the United Nations color. I doubt it. But I also thought that was really insightful in that article, and I recommend everybody reads it. Is that he mentioned that an email chain that Zuckerberg was on, and it was his interests mm-hmm. on his Facebook, and one of them was just domination. Like domination. That was literally in his interests. Yeah. Domination, destroying, building, and domination. Like what? What kind of psychopath are you? That's a horrible thing. Who are you, Donald Trump? Well, sociopaths are sociopaths, right? As
it turned out, I mean, we all know the story about Cambridge Analytica and the mm-hmm. and the embedding of Trump campaign officials within Facebook, and how Facebook facilitated that whole 2016 campaign. It's just it's a matter of record. Mm-hmm. So, but this started though with the fragmentation into tribes, which was by design. And he realized early on that no matter how ridiculous or mouth frothing your opinion might be, there's a tribe out there who shares it. And he put those people together. No matter how small. Prior to the internet, these mouth frothing people had really no way to communicate with each other, or they were on some bulletin board somewhere, Usenet, mm-hmm. whatever, or in a subreddit somewhere, mm-hmm. But before that, they were all held in check kind of by isolation.
Sure.
And Zuckerberg built a platform that would connect them with all the other village idiots around the world who shared this barking mad opinion. And, let me think of it. This is a preposterous example, but, if you're someone who believes that dachshunds, the wiener dogs, are the reincarnation of ancient genetically engineered Mesopotamian sheep who were abducted by hot dog shaped wormhole aliens, there's a Facebook group for that.
There definitely is. Yeah, there definitely
is. Somebody on, if they were a responsible organization and somebody tried to start a Facebook group based around this theory, somebody there would be telling people they're fucking idiots.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter so much if idiots believe a bullshit origin story for wiener dogs, but it does matter if they deny the Holocaust or an election result, or if they espouse QAnon or ISIS. And it especially matters if people in these micro tribes form a larger macro tribe endorsing violence or genocide or opposing science or social justice. And
Trumpism, for example.
Trumpism. I mean, this is
you just basically described Trumpism, right?
Well, it's the confluence of all of these little micro tribes into this river of hatred. And human strength, it's always been in community. And so this is no exception. Facebook has strengthened extremism and helped organize the previously scattered opposition to science and justice. And so it's gone beyond that to being where social media is now responsible for direct loss of human life on a grand scale, for enabling COVID denialism. I mean, there's a large vocal combative tribe that has now completely tied its social identity to COVID denialism. And of course, shout out to Matthew Remski and Derek Barris and all those guys at Conspirituality, because they really are going after that in a big way. And we love their podcast.
Absolutely.
But in this tribe of conspiritualists, okay, people are not dying by the hundreds of thousands, and masks and lockdowns are symbols of oppression, and public health officials are communists and they become targets for deadly violence. And so that violence is being actively organized on Facebook. And, this tribal denialism it's every bit as deadly as if that tribe were denying gravity and its members were jumping off buildings by the thousands.
Yeah. Yep.
Something roughly equivalent to denying gravity has now become socially acceptable to a major portion of the world's population. And if you get away with denying gravity, you can get away with genocide, and they are getting away with it.
They literally are getting away with it, man. And it's terrifying when you think about it from this perspective. I keep going back to the article because it was full of insights. But one that I thought was really fascinating, and you touched on this just now, and that is this idea, right, where what distinguishes social media from the sort of they mentioned this in the article, 4chan, 8chan, and now it's something else, 8kun or something like that. And they have to keep changing their name because they're so despicable that they get kicked off of platforms, whatever. Anyway, the bottom line is, though, that is essentially a message board, right? Mm-hmm. There is no algorithm running in the background. And this is what's super important too, is that everyone sees the same thing. That's important. Everyone that's on 8chan sees the same feed, right? When you go on Facebook, every individual of those 2.7 billion people have their own personal world. And this ties right into this idea of like, well, if I have my own little world, then it's basically I have a curated opinion, right? That I now, and by the way, Facebook will link me to people who share that opinion. And it's just so corrosive in a way that the traditional message board never was, even though they may be saying the most horrible things on those message boards. Like you said, Sean, astutely, is that they were isolated though, right? I don't know what happens on 4chan, but guess what? I know what happens on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. As you were saying that, it actually reminded me of something, and that is, how there's this experiment with utilitarianism. It's kind of used as a pushback on utilitarianism, because you could say, well, the greatest good for the greatest number. What if we just put everybody's brains in a vat and gave them drugs and made them really happy? Would that be great? To what role does pain and suffering play in a good life?
Sure.
As a feedback mechanism, right? And so. Essentially, what Facebook has done is to put everyone's brain in a vat where they are being given pleasurable drugs, which they're being told all day long on their feed, you're right, whatever you believe is right, your opinion is valuable. And that as a society is it's almost like this utilitarianism thought experiment, right? And
that's really interesting.
Finding the toxicity of that, of having us all addicted to being told we're right.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Yeah, that's a really great insight. And I wonder, you remember the Matrix 4 is coming out next year or whatever, and you obviously have seen the Matrix, right? And in the first one, or maybe it was the second, I don't remember, but the bottom line is what I'm getting at here is that Agent Smith says that the original Matrix broke because we just gave humans everything they wanted and they just rejected it because that's not how our brains work. Of course, this is just a movie, but I wonder, right, if in forming their proprietary algorithms, do they inject just enough, inject just enough contrary information or enough things that make us feel shitty, just enough for us to not become complacent or to stay combative or
right.
And it just I'm just sort of thinking about it, like the idea of like, what role does adversity play and pain play in our sense of satisfaction? Because clearly that's what Facebook wants, right? Facebook wants us to go there to feel satisfied.
Come back.
Right? Exactly. Come back. I wonder. I'm just thinking. I don't know.
This is an interesting point because what we know for sure, we have no idea what these algorithms do, but we know damn well that someone at Facebook does. And there's an entire laboratory that is studied this stuff and that is running the analytics constantly tuning and refining this thing to become more of that. Whether it's, whatever the balance is that keeps you coming back is what they want, because that's big money.
Exactly. That's it.
So, all right, well, I want to move on to the next section, which is, this is another thing that's been facilitated by Facebook and its groups, and that is general entertainment media criticism leading to toxic fandom and a proxy culture war. Where entertainment media has now become a part of this. And this gets back to another quote from Daryl Scott Collins. And he says, time to admit how many fans of fantasy, sci-fi, and superhero flicks and stories are into power without accountability and shit on justice.
Ain't that the fucking truth, man? Ain't that the fucking truth?
And this is what I mean when toxic by proxy culture war, when toxic fans use criticism of media to advance their racist, sexist, xenophobic, homophobic, and transphobic agenda. And so, this gets in again to the microtribalism of fan groups. And I'm going to share with you my own experience with Facebook groups in particular. And the executive summary of that is that as a policy, with few exceptions, I no longer belong to Facebook groups because they're almost entirely fucking poison. And that's because what Daryl is talking about here is true of many fan communities. I used to be a member of any number of music, film, television fan groups, and that includes groups that would normally seem like they would be progressive because the media they're discussing was generally progressive. What occurred over time, though, is that even though most of those groups have a no politics rule, the moderators would allow a lot of subtle racism, griping, whining against social justice by conservatives, particularly men. And I'd get in there on these groups and I'd say, no, you're just wrong about this. And plus that was kind of racist, what you said. And I'd get shut down and banned from these groups for breaking the no politics rule. And this is very similar to Facebook's complacency itself, because the complacency of group moderators is often the same silence that favors oppression, and it miscasts the defense of social justice as a rules violation. I mean, and this has happened to me every time I've caught a ban on Facebook itself or from a group. It's because I defended social justice and progress, often with colorful language, because as you know, let's be honest, we do cuss like drunken sailors on this show.
We sure do. We sure fucking do.
Yeah. Joke them if they can't take a fuck is what I always say.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you're on a show when you're on a platform where calling a racist or an asshole is considered worse than ideas that are promoting genocide, you know that we have a fucking serious problem.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, man. And I know you caught a ban earlier this week for this exact scenario, right? Which is and one of my biggest pet peeves, and what frankly, it's not even a pet peeve, it's fucking infuriating, is this idea that being called a racist is somehow worse than being a racist, right? Drives me fucking nuts. Like, what? And we talk about like being ethically unordered. That is a perfect example of ethical disorder. You are missing the fucking point. The fact that I'm saying fucking or calling this guy an asshole is a lot. I mean, is a lot less. It's not destructive at all. Meanwhile, this guy is spreading bigotry, lies, whatever, right? On this show, I always talk about how Instagram is a hotbed of bad ideas, and Facebook groups are also. I have mostly certainly any Facebook group that is overtly political, I have nothing to fucking do with, obviously. The only ones that I do stay on are the ones that are like so like plainly liberal, right? Like, so there's one that just because I know that everyone is thinking the same way, like, right, there's one that's called so this is the right's fabled memeing ability, and it's just all these just like, I mean, the memes from the right are just like astonishingly bad. Like, I mean, of course,
horrible.
They're horrible. I mean, like, they're always straw men, bad arguments, and they're not funny, right? They're always like really bad jokes or whatever. But anyway, the point is, those are the ones that I will still be a part of. I'm also part of 2 Star Trek ones, but this was where this toxicity comes in, right? Like, there's always going to be the people that are like, oh, well, I just don't like that Burnham cries. And it is a low key way of saying, I don't like that there's a woman in that position. I don't like because when you really try and drill down to what they don't like about it, they really don't have anything to say. And the question is, well, then why do you dislike her? And it's always because it's not the traditional thing. It's not what it used to be. And that's all code language for she's black. I mean,
that's so fucking transparent.
It's so transparent.
Yeah. And our last section is going to be talking about these little fake controversies.
Yes. We'll talk about that.
I want to bring up here first this, it should have been in the news section, but I think it's relevant. And that is this fake outrage and hypocrisy about foul language. Jen O'Malley Dillon is a top advisor to President-elect Joe Biden. And basically in an interview, she said, I'm not saying they're not fuckers. And she was right. And it was out of context, because what she was really saying there is that Democrats should work with Republicans even if they're fuckers.
Which is like a positive, right? Come on.
It's a message of unity.
Yes.
And yet the outrage, because she said fuckers, the outrage from the right was swift and severe, especially from Marco Rubio, who whined that Democrats preach unity, but this is how they really feel.
Marco Rubio, I think the only thing he can do is whine. I don't think that he has any capacity to have any other thing come out of his mouth besides just whining and complaining about things that are complete and utter bullshit. This is just an astonishing display of hypocrisy.
It's just the victim card. I mean, and this whole fake outrage, it's super rich from a party with a president who has repeatedly forced journalists during his presidential term to print the formerly unprintable. I mean, this is a guy who he swears like a drunken sailor, and he does it on national TV.
Yeah. At his rallies.
Yeah. And his base has consumed millions of t-shirts emblazoned with the slogan, fuck your feelings.
Yeah.
Not to mention their fucking death threats, okay? So Republicans are fuckers, and it's not an opinion. It's a provable judgment based on objectifiable, quantifiable behavior, especially their traitorous opposition to free and fair elections. So when people are more offended at bad words than bad deeds, you know that you are in the Republican bottomless pit of bad faith.
Exactly. I don't really have much to add other than bottomless pit of fucking bad faith. Always, always, always. The fact that Marco Rubio can come out with a straight face and say that is just, it really reflects where the GOP is at this point, where, again, like completely unmoored to truth or objective anything. And yes, you're absolutely right. If anyone listening to this or anyone out there disagrees that treason, that callous disregard for the death of people, advocating that people catch COVID-19, if that is not part of your definition, or that doesn't fit into the definition of fuckers for you, get your ethical house in order, my friends. Get your fucking ethical house in order.
Yeah. And this is a good segue into our next section, which is what you do with your friends. Sort of managing the arrange, because everybody's going to play this opinion card, and it's a national disease at this point. And
sure.
So you have to, as a liberal, progressive, or ethical person, you have to manage the range of acceptable opinions in your relationships. Because once someone has told you, once someone has done what we talked about, and they've told you who they are, why are you their friend?
Exactly. On what basis?
So this is another quote from Darrell, which I love. And he says, your Trump-Stapo family or friends are Confederate libertarian Nazis. Denying this makes you as evil as them. So get fucked.
That's so Darrell. So Darrell. I love it.
As we've said many times, you can't be friends with sociopaths without becoming one yourself. And this goes back to Steven Pinker. If you're willing to cast aside your ethics and loyalty to truth and humanity in favor of having friends who think that rocks fall up, you're just as bad as they are, even if you don't think that rocks fall up.
Yep.
So when you remain supportive of people who assault the truth, you become a participant in that assault. If you can't convince a person who thinks climate change or COVID is a hoax to change their tune, then you need to find better friends. And your family is also not worth your loyalty if they are effectively betraying all of humanity. These are crimes against humanity, folks. And it's not, the crimes don't start when people start getting hauled out to death camps. I mean, our American genocide has taken place without any force whatsoever being used. It's all been an information created and information driven genocide. So, and it really is, it's approaching the scale. I mean, we're going to probably see something close to 1 million deaths before this is over, and certainly 400,000 by the time Joe Biden is inaugurated. And then it's still another 6 months until everybody gets vaccinated. So we're going to see something, this is definitely, we're right in the middle right now of an American genocide. And, I don't hold out a lot of hope for most people to place their integrity ahead of their loyalty to friends and family. And, it's, I don't know why, but it's just beyond their capacity. They have a million excuses as to why they refuse to stand for what's right. And that bodes terribly for our future as a civilization.
Yeah, I mean, it's a human problem, right? It's a human problem. We have talked about this a lot, right? I don't speak to my father because he is a raging homophobe. And so that is an ethical line in the sand where I just had to draw the line. I say this a lot, though. And that is, it's a lot easier for me with my family because my family's not close. I'm not close to my parents. Like there's rifts, ethical rifts, but like there's the whole cult church thing, right? So my family's very diffuse. So I'm used to not seeing them in the fucking first place. So that makes it a lot easier for me to make those kind of calculations. And so so I know that is a criticism that's a criticism that I anticipate when I advocate that people hold their family to account. At a bare minimum, I think that it is, at a bare minimum, I think it is ethically necessary to be willing to confront family members, to not pretend like if you're going to go to your parents' house, your Trump parents' house for Thanksgiving or whatever, or Christmas, right? You have to be willing to say, when they say that Trumpy thing, confront them in the moment right then. None of this like, oh, I'm just going to let them say it because I don't want to rock the boat. That is the minimum. Minimum.
Be willing to drive away.
Exactly. Be willing to say, you know what? if you are, I'm going to get in the car and fucking leave.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Because there have to be consequences. There have to be consequences.
Yep. So we flog that all the time. And by the way, you don't have to explain yourself because, everybody has to make these ethical decisions, and it's going to be harder for some than others. But
exactly,
that just means you're a better person, and it's a requirement, folks. It really is. So, all right, moving on to our last example, because we're sort of getting close to the end of our time that we usually do, which is a couple of hours. But we
have a lot to say, folks. We have a lot to say.
We do. These are everyday examples of the opinion card that a lot of people tend to involve themselves in, which are things that you don't get to vote on or decide, but you nevertheless want to weigh in. And guess what? Nobody fucking asked you. Nobody asked you. You may have an opinion about these things, but it has no bearing on what's actually going to happen or any kind of reality. Your opinion about these things reveals more about you and either your ignorance or your racism or whatever, than about the subject you decided to weigh in on. And it's especially doubly galling when these passionate opinions are expressed after the fact, when it's too late to do anything about it. And I have a list here of things that generate endless and nasty arguments, and they're pointless. They're not matters of fact. They're matters of cultural conflict, but they have become proxies, as you were mentioning about the various Facebook groups that you've been in. And that's okay. Things like new Star Trek versus old Star Trek, right? Constant issue.
Non-fucking stop.
And Kirk is the sort of John Wayne type hero captain. And if you're one of these, if you're a deplorable, you probably like him a lot better than you like Picard, who's a, prissy, educated European dude, right? So, it's like, these are proxy culture wars. The Star Wars sequels. We all just roll our eyes. I got nothing.
I just don't like. The Star Trek sequels, Star Wars sequels. I mean, look. Again, I have my opinions about them, but we're going to talk about it. Go ahead. Keep going. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. Whether or not a show like Game of Thrones, that regularly tortures and disembowels people on screen, should have included rape scenes. For fuck's sake.
What the fuck? I mean, these kind of discussions, these arguments, and it's so important to think of them and talk about them as these proxy fights, because they absolutely are, Sean. They absolutely are. It's about this a fealty. Frequently, it's a fealty to, especially in Star Trek and Star Wars, a fealty to the old way of things, and a temper tantrum from white men, usually, that there is not a white man lead, right? Or that there's, or even if there is a white man lead, that is not. My favorite is that, I don't like the new Star Trek Discovery, but I can't wait for the Captain Pike series. Oh, interesting. That's really interesting. Because it's going to be written by the same people, right? I mean, it's the same era of Star Trek, but suddenly you're okay with it. Captain Pike is white, by the way, everybody.
Right.
And male.
Right. Just like Lorca. They were all fine with Lorca.
Yeah. No one had a problem with Lorca.
Until they found out that he was actually not a good guy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So then the other big one that happened about a year ago was whether or not you liked the last season of Game of Thrones, or you thought it should have been remade. You thought they were going to spend $80 or $100 million remaking an entire season of television because you didn't like it.
Come on.
Come on. Whether or not you think AC/DC was better before or after Bon Scott died.
There's another one. I mean, these are hills that people are willing to die on, right? Like these are hills for people willing to die
on. Just happened. Time Magazine's Person of the Year selection. People were absolutely incensed that healthcare workers didn't get the prize, and that instead they put Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on the front cover. How terrible of Time magazine to put, the president-elect and the vice president, historic vice president of a woman of color on the front color of magazine. No. Can't have that.
Exactly. Can't have that. I have an opinion about this. And like the same thing about, cabinet appointments, or we're going to talk about cabinet appointments down the road. On and on.
No, well, the cabinet appointments thing is so fucking stupid, okay? Because first of all, you don't have enough information to make a decision.
Exactly.
Biden is, how do you know the person you like for the cabinet even wants the position? Okay.
Yeah.
Biden, he's engaged in this vetting selection process that is wide. I mean, he's casting his net wide, and there's so many things that have to be taken into consideration. Can that person be confirmed? Okay. Are they going to come out of the House of Representatives and affect the balance of power?
Exactly.
Can they pass a background check? I mean, there's so many
factors. And I think one of the biggest factors right now is that these agencies have been gutted. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you want someone in there who can hit the ground running. You don't want somebody you want, first of all, an excellent manager, mm-hmm. right? Because you are going to have to rehire a bunch of people. You're going to have, mm-hmm. you want someone who knows the ropes. You want someone who has relationships with people to try and ask them to come back to government, right? After mm-hmm. they resigned. The entire State Department, for example, basically has left and has mm-hmm. been kicked out. So again, these are all these factors. And the fact that I'm going to sit here on my couch in front of my phone and say Joe Biden's pick's not liberal enough for me. I mean, where the hell do I get off?
It is the most god-awful nonsense I've ever heard. And I get
astonishing.
I get irritated at it every single time because it's the same old progressive centrist conflict in the Democratic Party.
Ugh.
And what they don't realize is that none of this shit matters because the limiting factor in the administration is not going to be those people. It's going to be Congress. It's going to be the
exactly
Senate.
Right.
Yep. And so,
Mitch McConnell.
Anyway, people talking about cabinet appointments, shut the fuck up.
We don't want to hear it.
We don't want to hear it. Okay. This was reaching back a little ways. Obama winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Again, mm-hmm. bunch of fucking racists.
Yep.
This one's close to home. New Rush versus old Rush. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I love all Rush, probably like you love all Bad Religion. And you know how you were talking about those 4 different periods that they did at their concert?
Yeah.
And that's the same way Rush is. I mean, Rush in their very last concert, they went from the end to the beginning. They played all their songs backwards. And it was great. It was one of the best concerts I'd ever been to. And yet you have these people who are constantly carping. It's like, they kind of lost me after Hold Your Fire. It's like, geez, guys. And they missed some of the best work. They missed some of their best work. And it's just a stupid matter of opinion it doesn't matter, folks. You don't like it? Just don't listen to it.
Don't listen to it. And this is, like you said, Bad Religion gets this flack all the time. And you and I talked about off air, and I want to talk about it here because it's important. And it's not important, but I care about it a lot. We care about it. But seriously, bands, right? They evolve over time. If you're a bit like Bad Religion's been around for 40 fucking years. So they went from being like 18-year-old kids mm-hmm. to being like, in their, to being full-fledged adults. And they've had the entire range of experiences that comes along with that, including musical development and perspective. And so the music has matured. And frankly, if, like you said, if you are only listening, only real Bad Religion is 80 to 85 or 80 to 90 or whatever you pick, right? Then you're missing out on some of their best work because they have become better musicians. They have become It's more intricate. It's not like 80s punk rock is and there's something really valuable about that. It's awesome. It's gritty. It sounds like a garage band, but I also love a highly produced, highly polished product too. There's value in all of it. And and this goes back to what we're talking about, this idea of like there was some idyllic time in the past, right? Mm-hmm. That is the theme that keeps running through this. There was some time in the past that was somehow better, idyllic, and people look back at it with rose-colored glasses.
Yeah. So it's just like it's all of these things. There's another one that came up recently about the 126 Republicans who, a lot of people think they shouldn't be seated in Congress. Well, guess what? You don't get to decide. It's a matter of law. Exactly. And if we want to throw those people out, then we can't get upset when they want to throw Biden out. And it's like we have to understand that it doesn't matter whether you think these people deserve to be seated. Americans voted for them. So, if they're going to be thrown out, if you're going to overturn 126 congressional elections, okay, you're just as undemocratic as the Trumpers.
Exactly right.
You suck.
And you suck. There's a delicate balance, right, between, and we talk about this on the show a lot, and that is the balance between being willing to get into the trenches with them, into the knife fight, into the phone booth, and be willing to have that knife fight, and violating one's own principles, right? That is a balance to be struck there. And certainly on the wrong side of that ledger is, let's just not seat 126 Republicans. Like, come on. Yeah. That is on the wrong side of that ledger. We are not going to go down the road of authoritarianism to get our point across. No. And just one more thing I want to point out, and this is another big subject, but people having opinions about how celebrities are dressing or what how they look like, for example, and it's always women. Sure. It's always women. And of course,
in this case, Billie Eilish, she showed her shoulders. She wore a tank top and everybody was dragging on her for that. And it's not always women, because guys, I think there was a guy recently who wore a dress on a magazine cover and he was endlessly dragged. And it's like, right. All of this opinion expressing that we're talking about here is transphobia, homophobia, slut shaming.
Yep.
It doesn't go in. There's no purpose to this. And you playing that opinion card is just you fighting this stupid proxy culture war to drag us back to the past. So I think we've made our point.
Yeah.
Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. That is a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt.
Amazing. And so on point. I love it. And it is really, I think, a really great way of crystallizing this conversation for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't want to know what I think of film and literature critics or armchair political quarterbacks. Here's a quote from another Roosevelt Teddy that sums up this entire episode. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
I love it.
So with that, we understand that America's greatest minds and greatest statesmen and stateswomen have never had much patience for the mental rot of unfettered opinions. And opinions continue to this day to cause great heartache and destruction. And so our final point here is the opinion card asshole of the week, and he has to be this 1970s reactionary Joseph Epstein. In Harper's Magazine, September 1970 issue, Epstein wrote what might easily be called the most grievous and insulting piece of self-loathing homophobia to ever grace a mainstream American publication. And really, you should read it because it's spectacular and not in a good way. And this is the guy who returned from the crypt to call our next first lady kiddo in the Wall Street Journal and to tell Dr. Jill Biden that she's not a real doctor. Okay.
Unbelievable.
Not to be outdone, fucker Snarlson has come out in support of Epstein and claimed that Dr. Jill Biden is a borderline illiterate.
What do you even fucking say to that?
There's nothing else to say, but that through opinions, we are plumbing the depths of public depravity. And so my final comment here is you may have an asshole, but you don't have to be one. And no, you don't have the fucking unfettered right to your own opinion. You will be judged and evaluated on what you believe and on what you say. And that's the very definition of accountability. When you open your mind or your mouth too widely or too carelessly, you will narrow the choices for the kind of future that we are able to have for all of humanity. So choose wisely. One final shout out to Daryl Scott Collins. He says, we are living on the pages of epic poetry. And he's right.
Yeah.
So that does it for our show. Any final thoughts?
Oh man, it's been a lot of fun, and we've talked about a lot of serious things and a lot of funny things. I will say that first of all, just to comment quickly on Jill Biden, we support you here on the Radical Secular, and we are glad that you got like sort of upswelling of that she got an upswell of support. And I want to point out that Epstein is not even a doctor himself, right? He does not have a PhD. He does not have an MD. He is just some guy. To be fair, he's more than just some guy, but he is a piece of shit also. And just generally, and that is my opinion. But it also turns out to be very, very borne out by the facts. And I'll end with that.
Yes. Well said. And I want to remind you to make sure and subscribe to this podcast. We're available on all the major podcast channels. Christoph and I work really hard to bring you great content every week. And of course, making the show is something we both really enjoy. We don't do any advertising. So if you like what you're hearing, follow us on social media, leave us a good rating, write a review of our show, and take the time to talk about us on Facebook. Blog about us, tell your friends and family. Word of mouth really matters. Also, please don't hesitate to email us with any notes or suggestions. We love hearing from our listeners. And look, thanks everyone for being here. Remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.